Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Foundations of Business, Management 1104. Hope you're doing well as we continue on with this summer session here in the middle of June. Today, we're going to go over Chapter 13, which is Management in Union and the relationship between the two. And so hopefully, again, as I mentioned each time, that you've read the chapter and things are understand. And if you don't understand parts of the chapter, feel free to reach out for additional information. Business simulation, CAPSIM, be sure that you have registered. Not only have you registered for this, but you are also working on your individual training. That's an important aspect to be going through. Again, the business simulation is your capstone, your semester capstone learning team project, and very, very important for you not only to register, but to also go through the individual training. Once you complete the individual training, that'll show up on my dashboard. I'll then give you credit for that. Exam 2, update and reflection. So those exam grades have been released. You'll have access to those. Once they're released, you'll have access. Don't forget, pop quizzes are still available. If you've noticed, I've tried to have a pop quiz each and every week on the chapters that you have done. We've already talked about the CAPSIM training. Be sure you go from start to finish. There's different levels to it. It's very intuitive. Again, easy putt for a 100. More importantly than the grade and the completion is the knowledge that you're going to gain, not only on the platform itself, but quite frankly, it reiterates what we're learning throughout this semester in this course. So it's an excellent reflection tool, and again, more important as we move forward. All right, motivation. This is actually covered in the textbook. We don't cover it anymore in this particular course. Because you'll actually see it again in another management course at the 3000 level. But at the end of the day, most of us are motivated. Psychologist Abraham Maslow studied the hierarchy of needs. And this was his theory, is that we all have basic needs: food, water, warmth. We also want security and safety. Those are basic needs that, at the very, very least, this is what we need. For our mental health, physical health, ways to keep us motivated, all of that. And then we sort of move into what he referred to as the psychological needs. And that typically is friends, intimate relationships, this wanting to belong and this need for love is part of that. That can be both on a personal level and certainly on a professional level. I think about, in some cases, I spent more time with the people I worked with than the people I lived with, right? I spent more time with my work family than I did my personal family. Why? I traveled, working 7 to 6 sometimes, traveling all over the world. There were moments of my life that certainly were out of balance, and I was spending more time. But, so what that means is those relationships that we have both in and out of work are important to us. Then we all, sort of have this esteem needs, this feeling of accomplishment, the prestige. Think about when you graduated high school. Think about when you finished your first semester at Virginia Tech. For me, it was graduating college, finishing up my graduate work, going through a corporate ladder and climbing that ladder. And then there's the end, the self-fulfillment. What does that self-actualization look like? These achieving one's full potential and using the creative ideas. So kind of getting to that pinnacle. Who are we? What are we about? What is it that we're going to do? What are we recognized for? What's our legacy? And for all of us, that's very different. I mean, that should be a unique journey, a unique path, a unique endpoint, quote unquote endpoint. For us. That's what we get to, sort of that pinnacle. And that can be very, very different in many, many ways for all of us. But at the end of the day, you can see where Maslow was going. And I share this particular slide, for what? Who cares? Well, because each one of these is what motivates us as an employee, as a human being, to want change. If our environment does not fall within these categories, we get concerned. If we, for example, on security, if we don't feel like our jobs are secure, if we feel like we might get fired tomorrow, or that there's a safety concern of some type, those are basic needs. We're going to raise our hand. We're going to start to look elsewhere to find that motivation. We're going to look elsewhere to get that need met in some way, right? So I want to encourage you. There's a couple of videos I want you to watch within the chapter. Be sure to watch those. Organized labor, based on this video, and let me preface this. I come from both sides of this discussion. Number one, I'm a member. Growing up, my parents did not finish high school. They're both blue collar, hardworking people. They taught me, about integrity. They taught me about work ethic. They did not measure their success based on a college degree. They measured their success on how hard they worked. With that being said, being part of a blue collar family, they both were members of unions. And so growing up, I was a part of a union family. So I got to see the good, the bad, the ugly of all. I got to understand their perspective. Obviously, they were a little bit biased, with management and things like this. But again, this was in the 80s, the 70s and the 80s. Organized labor was very, very strong from that. Now, flip side, in the early 90s, in fact, 1990, I joined an organization and quickly moved up into management. And, I was a salaried worker. I was, supervisor to middle management. And so I actually was on the other side of it and actually defended or fought off 2 union votes. And I remember wearing a button, probably 1993, 1994. And that is, the only good union is a credit union, right? That was a way for us to defend and fight it off. So based on, that, first off, let's define what a union is. And it's basically an organized group. The goal here is to improve pay, job security, and working conditions. And over the last, let's say, 100 years, labor unions have been responsible for a number of things, including child labor, job safety, minimum wage, and you can see the others here. So, if you look back in the 30s and 40s, we were actually using children 7, 8, 9 years old to go into mines and bring out the output. Sometimes they would go into the mines and come out. Sometimes they would go into the mines and they would never be seen again. And as a society, we started to say, there's something wrong with that, right? That should not be happening. And so that's when unions were like, okay, working conditions, very bad, job security, job safety. Now we have seen, certainly a decline in union membership over the last 40 years or so. Number of reasons for that. I would say that part of it is outsourcing. So we've moved jobs, outside the US to low-cost countries, China, Vietnam, India. So that has happened. Secondly, I would give credit, to both workers who have fought and pushed organizations to do things better. And then I would give organizations credit as well for making the appropriate changes. I would also say there's another part of this, and that's government. So government putting regulations, safety now is important. We're here at Virginia Tech, talk about construction. It's all over this campus. And think about the policies and procedures just to get on to that or get into that construction site. Hard hat, certain safety shoes, they're called steel-toed safety shoes, harnesses, all of these things that quite frankly 30 or 40 years ago just were options. They weren't mandatory like they are now. So the downward trend is, obviously there's some right to work states. Virginia is a right to work state. So employees not required to join a union, even if the workers at a company have been organized there. There's also this economic shift, which I've already talked about. Now, the service economy, what's interesting is many smaller firms, and so it's more challenging to organize. And so right here in Blacksburg, you know, if you look at the companies that have 50 or less, it's pretty large. And so it's a little bit different. I would also say that in organizations like that, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the intimacies are much different. Ping pong tables, go out for lunch, meet at a brewery after work on the weekends. You know, there's a different piece of culture there from that standpoint. Organized labor, we've talked about federal laws. So the National Labor Relations Board was organized in 1935. And, you know, this basically is there to help both labor and management with their practices and be able to do that. What does the NLRB do? Textbook gives you all of those and outlines this. Really helps to facilitate settlements. If it gets to a specific case, then there's the NLRB will have administrative law and judges and a board who oversee that. And then they enforce those orders as well. Just some different examples of unions that are listed here. Many of those, again, pros and cons. Certainly, you know, the positives of a union, workers' rights, pay conditions we've already talked about, does give a stronger united voice. You know, so there's, you know, one person or a group of people that are speaking for hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of people. So it's a collective voice. And, you know, ultimately it makes management more accountable. Now there's obviously some downsides. It gets into, you take collaboration out, you take cooperation out, and it really becomes a we versus they. Hard to get things done. There becomes this bureaucracy. As wages increase, there's an example coming up here in a few minutes. It's difficult to sustain, you know, $20, $25, $30, $35 an hour. Very difficult in a price-sensitive, price-conscious marketplace to be able to sustain those rising wages. It costs to be a member of a union. You know, back again when I was 20, 25 years old, and again, in business, we were fighting off the union. Most of the workers thought that it was free and they didn't have to pay anything. Union is a union, but I mean, those dues were extraordinary. I remember someone coming in and telling me that the dues were $200 and $300 a month, sometimes exceeding their own car payments, right? Certainly can hurt international competitiveness. Strikes, certainly we want, you know, companies want to avoid that. Just geographically, you can see where, you know, a lot of union activity is. The Midwest, partly because there's a lot of automotive suppliers, automotive manufacturers there. West Coast, you know, a lot of union activity. Where I was trying to think was on the Southeast here. So you look at North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, a lot less. And so you see a lot of economic development activity in those states. You know, Tennessee, Volkswagen put an automotive plant there. You look at South Carolina, BMW put an automotive plant. If you've ever traveled through Alabama, Hyundai, Kia have large facilities there, partly because they're non-union, typically are non-union states. Now, that could be changing over time. Just some various processes. You should know these processes that, you know, that management and unions can use to get through and navigate through different struggles between the two, whether it's mediation, where an impartial third party will come in. They'll make recommendations to reach an agreement, but the agreement's not enforceable. Arbitration, there's actually a person, you know, that will come in and say, okay, this is the agreement, this can be enforced. Grievances or complaints that are made by either side, both union or management. And so those have to be evaluated. A strike, you know, people leave their jobs until it's settled. Picketing and boycotting, I think you can understand those. Collective bargaining is just a process when two sides, both workers and management, and they're looking at job security, working conditions, benefits. So they kind of come together and look at, in a way, a cooperative way to solve the problem. Major League Baseball just went through a collective bargaining agreement with that. So in collective bargaining, you can look at whether it's a non-union environment or a unionized environment. So it can be in either one. It's really just a process of settling differences and establishing mutual conditions. And so collective bargaining can be used on either side. Now, the question becomes, are unions still useful in 2022? It's interesting because I used to, talk about this chapter in 2018, 2019, and quite frankly, kind of felt like it was getting a little bit old. We really hadn't seen much activity from unions over time. However, living wage, looking at minimum wage, looking at working conditions in the sense of creativity in working conditions. Since COVID, there has been an extraordinary increase in union organizations. And they're coming about in organizations that I would not have thought about. So the arguments for the useful unions, certainly better pay, better working conditions, living wage, safety, all of this. There arguments against it. It does have a tendency, research does show that it has a tendency to protect underperformers. So those that really kind of want to get lost, maybe instead of 40 hours, they want to do 36, 37, they can sort of fly under the radar and get away with that. It does protect them in that standpoint. And then it has pushed companies to maybe look offshore, but sometimes even look at automation. It's interesting. A robot does not call in sick. A robot does not take excessive smoke breaks. A robot does not. I'm not advocating for automation, but that sometimes is the thought process when you start to look at union activity. Can it be automated? And it does take that human element out of it from that standpoint. Just some current events. Amazon. You look down south, Amazon and their warehouses. There's been a lot of union activity and unionization at Amazon warehouses, partly because over the last 2 to 3 years during COVID, they're working more hours and perhaps they're not feeling secure or safe. They're not feeling like they're being taken care of. They're not getting the pat on the back that they feel like they deserve. Starbucks. So Starbucks, Buffalo, New York, I believe, is where the first one was. They have already organized a union, and there's some others. So what typically happens is when one location, it happens there, there's like a domino effect, and others will follow. Major League Baseball, there was some holdouts. If anyone is a baseball fan, you saw spring training. A lot of games were canceled. The season was pushed because they were negotiating the collective bargaining agreement. Thankfully, they came through. Back in 2019, the UAW and the automotive, both GM and Ford had to renegotiate. So back in 2000, you turn the clock back to 2008, and salaries and wages had become unsustainable. So back in 2008, 2009, during the decline, the economic collapse, GM went bankrupt. And in order for them to survive the bankruptcy, they had to renegotiate their labor contracts. And so current workers could maintain, let's say, just for an example, $20 an hour, but new workers came in, were at like $12 to $15 an hour. But over since 2008 to 2019, automotive business was rocking, profits were being made. And so the union workers said, listen, it's time to renegotiate. We were there for you during the tough times. You have to be there for us during the good times. You can see here, it cost the company about $2 billion because there was a strike. It lasted for a couple of weeks during that. I remind you to watch the chapter video. Excellent reflection by this particular legal counsel. He's worked on both sides of it. And so it's an excellent, excellent video for you to watch. Again, any questions, feel free to reach out. Be glad to answer them for you. That wraps up chapter 13. Again, we're marching through through the textbook and through our course. And I'm glad you're with us this summer. Take care of yourself. Talk to you soon.